Okay, so we're going to turn our time over to Grant Herdrich. He's with Park City Procurement. Are you like the procurement official or procurement manager? What's your official title there, Grant?
I'm the procurement manager for the city.
He previously served as the procurement manager here at the Division of Purchasing, and he holds a bachelor's of science in biology and a Juris Doctor. Is that how you say it?
Yeah.
With a focus in healthcare law, which means you really did a couple of things and you're well-rounded. Now you're even more well-rounded, right? Current role, he works as across wide range municipal operations, supporting everyone from construction. He could answer those questions, or transit projects to recreational facilities and specialized procurements. So when he's not herding cats at work, he has dogs at home. And has 2 daughters and limits his leisure time to mountain biking and trail running, which congratulations. Yeah, no.
Yeah. Also, I don't know how I missed it. Proud chicken dad. Yeah. So Tara asked me to present today, and she kind of said, hey, we've been asked questions about hey, cities kind of feel a little left out. We talk a lot about code, and we talk a lot about stuff that sometimes doesn't always apply to them. So I'm going to talk about some stuff that we've done, Park City rules. It's going to be real simple for me to describe Park City's rules to everybody. I'm going to talk about some projects really quickly. Some stuff that you guys might be able to relate to, some quirkiness that can be city procurement, county procurement, other procurement. I'm going to look at some procurements we've done, depending on time, and kind of review where the procurement's not good. Why didn't they go well? What were the questions that were asked of the procurement team? Our procurement team has grown since I've been here. When I came on board, I was told I was the only one. I found out later that our transit team had somebody that did procurements for them. And then we hired a gentleman who's on the call right now, John, who didn't have any experience, but we trusted him, and he's doing a fantastic job. But in this procurement or in this presentation, I was asked not to be code/rule heavy. I kind of want to just have an open talk, and hopefully you guys can kind of relate to what I'm talking about. So first, I know Tara's already gone over this. I thought I knew what I was doing, and I'll start with the end here. The state's broken up into pods. I worked with the same people over and over again. Almost every single one of my procurements went well. My Salesforce data from when I left, I think it said it took me 40 days to go from procurement to signed contract. The organization was focused on procurement. The state government was, it was kind of a machine, right? We think about it as being slow, but we can move fairly quickly. And I also want to confirm we're kind of in a procurement trust tree here. I'm going to spill some beans about some stuff that's happened at Park City. Hopefully no one from the auditor's office is on this call. Please don't call the auditor's office after this presentation. But, we're often making the best decisions we can at a city, and we can't always predict outcomes, and we don't know what we don't know. And as procurement professionals, so often our knowledge is an inch deep, and a mile wide, right? I have to know so much about so many different things, but I don't know beyond what the procurement says. So let's go over Park City code, rule policy. We adopted state code in full. Most cities, municipalities, I think, adopt it in part. We also have our own procurement policy. So, for cities, and I actually gave a presentation about this, I think it was 2 years ago. It's, do you follow state code? Do you have your own code? Do you have a blended code? Do you have your own rules? And even the state has differences here. The state, it always sounds so simple when we do presentations, but they cut out, the Attorney General's office has some, rules of their own that deal with procurement. And, UDOT has some rules of their own that deal with procurement. And so there are always some nuances here. And I think as the state is the same, each individual city is probably more different, right? Like, I know very little about other cities' procurements, but Salt Lake City, as far as I'm aware, can't do a RSOQ for an award. So it's like they can't do a Part 15. If Kat's on the call, she can tell me how wrong I am on that one. But there's differences between what we do. So it's really hard to compare. So that's kind of my, like, we're comparing apples to oranges to watermelons sometimes. We're just all over the map. So let's talk about Park City. So the Park City difference, and please don't sue me, Deer Valley. I just thought it was a catchy phrase. We have 8,500 residents. We're an international tourism economy. We have a $98 million operating budget. And for fiscal year 26, we have a $200 million capital improvements project fund. It's a lot of money for 8,500 people, right? So I'm going to go over what that means. We're basically a city, a county, a resort operator, a recreation district, a utility pretending to be a municipality. We might also be a country club. I'm still not sure. And we're only talking about 84060. Most of the parts that people consider Park City are actually outside the city boundaries. And all of that money that I just talked about, I say all of it, we do collect some other taxes, but that all comes from sales tax. So we have a transit department. So again, I work for the state. Now all of a sudden I have to follow FTA circulars, which I still don't know why they're called circulars, but they are. But that's basically FTA rules. We have to communicate with the UTA and UDOT. And then also just like for procurement, do you know how many things are on buses? We've got cameras, GPS, Wi-Fi, CAD AVL, which is automated vehicle logistics or something like that, battery systems, dispatch software. Procurement has to own a piece of all of that. And that doesn't even get into transportation planning. I'm going to use some federal words, but like we've got Recreate 248, which has like a NEPA process stuff. And how many millions of dollars is that going to go through? And how do we buy buses? You're just kind of sitting there going, like, I'm not even through slide one. I'm like, everything's kind of a headache. So as a city, we operate our own transit. We also have a library. It's big. We've got 3D printing, a movie theater, stage performance, rotating art galleries. I have a note here that says I have no idea what they're doing over there. That's kind of true. Everybody in our city goes through training, and I got kind of a contract, and I emailed the library and was like, hey, how did we end up here? And they were like, oh, you're not involved because we got a grant for that. And you told us that grants are not a procurement. Well, at some point, a grant becomes a procurement. And when you get the grant and you spend the money, we are now in a procurement. You have library people trying to tell us IT terms for an automated scanning in system for books. Auditorium equipment, we're done with Sundance now, but we had performances, presentations, movies being shown here. And you'd actually be surprised how, like, for the systems we have, there are actually very few knowledgeable vendors out there. So I have to do library procurements. Recreation. All right, so we have an 80,000 square foot gym. Most cities I know don't operate recreation centers. Usually that's a county thing. But we have our own because we're Park City. And we see 325,000 visitors a year. We're building a new pool with 8 lanes and a leisure pool. We also have an ice rink, a golf course, a skate park, and we're building a new community center for $80 million. We're also in the process of building a senior center. Again, something that is usually a county-run thing, but the city's had one forever. We're kind of end up being the people to build it. So we're talking construction projects, architecture projects, fitness equipment, I finally did my first CMAR contract, construction manager at risk. You know, that pool was a bid. I don't know how many people in cities, you might have dealt with this before, but like the engineering team had the architecture firm write the bid documents for us. And I think there were like 3 errors on before I got to page 2. I don't know if anybody's ever dealt with that. You know, tons and tons of fun. That pool, I don't know if anybody's ever like put out a bid for a new pool system before. I mean, that thing's $9 million because we also wanted it to be open this year. So we made them work through winter. We have trails and open space, Park City. You know, we own 9,921 acres of land, some of it not actually in the city. We have 7,000 for open space. And, you know, we have one of the best trail systems in the world. It's a big draw to Park City in the summertime. But that means trail building, forestry work, fuels mitigation, invasive species. I do have a good story about the, you know, invasive species. We had a resident call us to tell us that she had a whole bunch of weeds growing by her fence. That afternoon, a bunch of weird looking men showed up in hoodies and were standing around her fence. And she called the police on the people that showed up because she didn't expect that they would show up that day to remove the plants from her fence line. And so our Trails and Open Space team had the police called on them. Like I said, I'm trying to fly through these just so we can get to kind of the good stuff. Three Kings Water Facility. This was supposed to be an $80 million facility. Ended up being $109 million. We were kind of voluntold that we would create this water facility. What does a water facility mean? Water chemicals. We're looking at $100K a month for hazardous chemicals to be delivered. You know, when you get a call from the water department that tells you that the person we ordered chemicals from hopped out of a vehicle and started pumping chemicals into the vat without any PPE on, and you're like, oh gosh, we got to call somebody else. Like that, we can't have that person deliver ever again, right? The water, we're filtering out arsenic, antimony, iron, manganese, thallium, cadmium, PFAS, which is, you know, everybody probably has heard PFAS, the forever chemicals. We still have 2 other water facilities besides this one. If you do ever get a chance, they do tours of this facility. If you ever want to see what comes out of your drinking water, it is crazy. So it's super cool, but it's a lot of complexity. So now I'm kind of getting to the good stuff. So code, state code 63G6A. The code lays out the framework for your policies and rules generally. Policy says how it's done. We provide guide rails, you know, and again, when I came on board, remember, I knew what I was doing. But PCMC policy just mimics state code. It is literally regurgitated code back out. It was before I got there. I don't know who they paid to literally rewrite code, but put it in paragraph form, but they did. We should have a policy, so we should say how it's done, but we don't have any. And so that's why I'm sweating. That's why I'm sweating at my job. And so this is where we're going to get into, I'm going to talk about 2 procurements. And the first one is very relevant. I actually really thought that would take me a lot longer to get through those slides. The first one is very relevant. And, you know, the second one's kind of more of an operations goof almost. And I'm going to talk about Bonanza. And Bonanza Park, this is my first slide of the deck. It shows the corner of this property. It's about a 5-acre property. The city bought it years and years and years ago with the plan to develop it. We've kind of just let it sit. We've let people put trailers on it to host events. And well, the plan has always been to develop it. The plan has always been to do something there. So when I came on board, they had already started an RSQ for this project, RSOQ. They wanted to create an approved vendor list for a future procurement for this property to develop it. So as you can see, the first RSOQ failed. And why did it fail? Creating an AVL failed, which is a low bar. I'm going to talk about our city council, which if you're part of a county or a city, you might have to deal with a council. When I was at the state, I was part of the elected officials body. We ran procurements that were from the legislature. They wanted this procurement done, and they never got involved. But it's the city level or at the county level, that's not necessarily the case. They sometimes want to get really involved. So we ran this RSOQ, and council is adamant that somebody told them, and this was again before I got there, apparently somebody had said, oh, don't worry, you can still hire whoever you want after we run this RSOQ. So why are we running an RSOQ if we're going to hire whoever we want, if we're going to run an open procurement later? And so they claim that the city lied to them. Was the procurement bad? No. But why were we creating it? So we canceled the AVL. So we ran a second RFP. Our city council dictated to us that they didn't want people from the city on the RFP selection committee. So we had 12 scoring members from outside the city. When I was at the state, it was like 7 is the max. 7 is the max. Do not go above 7. It just gets crazy. So now we have 12 scoring members. We did eventually convince them to get 3 city employees on that scoring team. So that it went from 9 to 12 from me, but I felt like we should have some people from the city on that. So we ran an RFP. So we had a submission. We had interviews, we had final scoring, and we get to city council to approve it, and they reject it. They said, we won't sign this contract. And again, it's a small town. Somebody that used to work for the city who was not listed in the RFP was on the vendors team. I'm very lucky to be friends with Blake, and I think I called him like 3 times over this project. She was also married to somebody that was going to benefit from the project, and it looked bad, so they rejected it. So we ran a third RFP. We made significant changes to it. We promised $30 million to the developer to help develop this project, to include underground parking because we didn't want too many parking spaces. But the other thing that became fun was, if you guys have ever dealt with, a public body like a council, and they wanted to get involved. We've now run 2 procurements, and they were unhappy with both of them, so they wanted to get involved. So we actually wrote an RFP in a city council meeting, which I never thought I'd have to do. Literally letting them read through the RFP, all of the scoring, everything we were doing. And I had to start answering questions on the spot in a public meeting. Like, do we have to award to the highest score? Well, we don't have any policies about that. And code just says that we're going to give it to the person that's the best value for the city. So technically, no, but yes, we do. Can we talk amongst ourselves before scoring? So the city council, one of their changes to the last one was they wanted to score the RFP. Which, if you've ever had your city council on an RFP, you have to do that in an open public meeting. So they had to do all of their stuff in an open public meeting, including interviews with vendors. And then there became other questions. And coming from the state, some of these were hard for me to answer because we had rule. Rule told us not to do things. So it became, can we just move the top 2 vendors through? Well, code doesn't prohibit that. So as long as we put it in the procurement, we probably can. Can we vote on who wins? Because that's how city council does stuff. They vote. Well, we adopted the state code in full. And I'm going to read some code to you, which is always the best. 63G 6A 7077A says that the committee will submit their recommendation to the procurement unit based on the scores of the criteria. So no, you probably can't vote. Again, we have no rules or policy. We're a city, and no one had ever thought about what should our rules be? How do we handle this? You know, they wanted to know, okay, well, instead of just scores, can't we just rank them? It was just a can we sort of questions in front of a public group of people, which is tons and tons of fun. All right. You know, and then even the questions, can we cancel? Can we cancel again? Can we allow the city council to be on the scoring team? You know, these were all things that we just hadn't really contemplated at all at Park City. The other thing here is at the end of this procurement, my name's over this thing everywhere. And I didn't get a vote. I didn't get a say. I had people reaching out to me being like, is this you? Is this really you? So, yeah. But, you know, at the end of this, it makes sense as to why Park City Municipal Corporation has 5 lawyers. We like to do weird things. So I'm going to kind of move on from that. This was just a fun one because it's like, I say fun, not even in hindsight is this fun. That was a terrible word for me to use. I don't know the amount of times I ever lost sleep at the Division of Purchasing. I lost sleep over this procurement. So I'm going to move to the next one, which is we're asked to do an IT audit. This is, again, a council ask because our IT department, their implementation rates are slow. They're not keeping up with demand. All right, so we run this audit. Everyone agrees there's very few people that are probably interested. Our budget's pretty low. The council only gave us a budget of like 60 grand to do it. Not enough people are going to be interested. And the council wanted to appoint the scoring committee, which technically a procurement officer does, but the city manager is our procurement officer. And he said at the time, yeah, sure, appoint who you want. And so they appointed 2 directors and 2 senior leadership to run the IT audit. RFP. We had 36 vendors submit with a 30-page maximum. I think I did the math before. That's like 1,200 pages of submissions. Our IT team is something like 6-7 people. Our council doesn't understand how Heber, the town next to us, gets away with like 2. So if we have 6-7, obviously the management is wrong. You know, how much did it cost the city to run this procurement? For basically 2 executive and 2 director level people reading 1,200 pages of submissions. And then we got the results back. And the IT audit found that they were underfunded, underpaid, and overworked. You know, we, as Park City, we have 4 different AI systems currently in use in the city. You know, our IT team is technically not allowed to say no to anybody wanting to create an implementation. So audit just basically said, hey, you guys need more rules and you need to start to centralize. You need to give IT better chances. And the reason I say this is like, this is part of my job is like, how expensive is a procurement? And when, you know, when you're running a $60,000 procurement and it costs you $10,000 to run it, Did you run it well? Like these are all questions that I suddenly had to ask myself working for a city. So now I'm actually going to get into some advice, and I know now that I went really long on that Bonanza slide. So my advice, be simple, be clear at the city when you're doing procurements. The beginnings are part 7 basics. You know, what is missing for your procurement? These are you have to have it. It has to be posted publicly on a website. Description of what you're buying, instructions to submit, objective criteria, cost or subjective criteria. How is it going to be opened? What are the terms and conditions that you plan to have signed? But these are the things that are not in code. How will you award? I mean, honestly, I wouldn't want to defend anything but the highest scoring vendor. I wouldn't want to put anybody in that position. But like, is there going to be a special way that you award? It's based on the scores submitted. You're having the best value put forward by your group. Do you have provisions in your procurement for an interview or extra stages? If you add stages, how will you bring people forward? The code doesn't tell you how to do this. This is actually where you get to have a little bit of fun compared to the state, which has to use their scores. Top 3, you're allowed to do that. Score above X number or X%, that's what the state does, required under Rule 33. You can do that. Competitive range, our transit team loves that one because that's the federal one. Go crazy. You should probably have in there what the contract length is going to be. And if you're going to allow outside links or videos, that was a fun one. People that just hit their page limit and then linked to another procurement or other pages or videos. Other things that we found that are missing, late submissions. We had somebody submit at the RFP said 5 p.m. just that exact number p.m. Somebody submitted at 5:00:19 seconds, and our legal team tried to argue that was 5 p.m. I don't agree with that at all. But what are we going to do? We also had one where our email system blocked a vendor out, and we were getting ready to award, and I'm not even kidding, the day we were submitting the award into U3P, the email came through with their submission. They got held up for IT. Debriefs. Are you going to debrief people? Do you debrief people? We adopted the state policy or the PERCH 02, and then GRAMA. What are the GRAMA requirements? R337802 also gives you some stricter GRAMA stuff. So these should all be things that you're thinking about when you're writing a procurement. And I'm sorry I had to rush through the end there. Like I said, I meant to start my timer on time and I didn't. I put this in here because I found it really funny that AI thought that I should have horses in this slide. I asked AI to help me out with some of this stuff. I actually ended up rejecting everything but this last slide. If you have any questions or you ever want to talk procurement, you ever want to talk about working with the city, please reach out to me. I'm always happy to talk to people and help you guys out.
Thanks so much, Grant. We appreciate your sharing your knowledge with us.
Of course. Thank you, Tara.